So today I'm going to teach you a focus training protocol that will help you massively increase your productivity so that you can get more done in less time. Hi, my name is Mark Queppet. I'm a professional men's coach since 2013. And other than helping guys quit porn, improving a man's focus habit is probably one of the biggest things that I've gotten really pretty good at helping guys with. And really this makes sense because the two typically go hand in hand. When a guy wants to level up in life, he typically wants to cut the escapist BS like porn and scrolling, and he wants to get more good stuff done. So here's how we're going to do this. We are going to go from distracted to focused. But in order to do that, we've got to go from a working mentality to a workout mentality. All right. Like if we want to really train our focus, we can't just be trying to get stuff done and be like constantly in work mode. Okay. We got to be thinking about this as how are we going to actually increase our focus, and treating it like a workout for our focus is the best way to do this. And when we start approaching our work in this way, well, then we can go from a laborer mentality to a true professional mentality. Because at the end of the day, like who we are is all determined by how we think about ourselves. You're not just a workhorse. If you're going to be getting work done, you want to be doing it as a professional. You want to be doing it as someone who's really on top of their game and ready to do things the right way, right? To not just try and white knuckle everything, but really focus on efficiency, optimization, and impact. So at the heart of this process, we have what I call the focus training cycle, all right? And this cycle is pretty simple. We have to plan, execute, and then we've got to recover. All right, these three steps are the keys to making sure that we get stuff done. We have to keep going around in this circle, and if we nail this cycle properly, well, then we're going to be able to be incredibly focused and be very productive. Now, this cycle, it operates on two levels, okay? So we've got the daily cycle, and that's going to be, right, we're going to have a planning part of our day, an execution part of our day, and then a recovery part of our day. But this all of this then is broken down into work sets. These are little micro cycles of plan, execute, recover, plan, execute, recover. So set 1, set 2, set 3, depends on how you set it up, which we'll get into, but you're going to have multiple little micro cycles of planning, execution, and recovery spread throughout your day. So we're going to start off by looking at how we set up the macro, like our daily cycle of focus. So first thing here is we need to have a clock in time. You need to have clarity around when you are starting your day. When is like, all right, I'm going into productivity mode. For a lot of guys, this boundary is very soft. They don't know exactly when they're on the clock, when they're off the clock. And so like this becomes a problem because they don't know what they're supposed to be holding themselves to. They kind of just float mindlessly in and out of work mode. And that just really destroys your ability to be like a laser beam. So we got to get our in time. Maybe it's 8 o'clock, maybe it's at 9 o'clock, maybe it's at 4 a.m. I don't know, but you got to pick some time where it's like, all right, I am on the clock. I've started my focus day. So this brings us to the next piece. And the next piece is pretty obvious. It's our clock out time. This is going to be different for, different people. All right. Maybe you want to start at 3 o'clock as your clock out time. Maybe it's going to be, 5 o'clock. It's going to be dependent. But the thing is, you need to have this boundary here of in and out. I'm on the clock or I'm not. And by making sure that you have a clear out time, that allows you to then nail your recovery later in the day, which we'll get to. But some guys, they have this mistake of being like, I'm going to be on the clock all the time. And that is terrible for focus because it's literally not possible for you to be focused all of the time. We're not designed for that, particularly if you're a knowledge worker or you're doing anything that requires a lot of cognitive effort. You need to have time where your mind's able to just kind of relax, be present in the moment, enjoy your life. All right. So these clear lines of in and out are going to set the framework for everything else that we're doing. So now on to the next piece here, which is we need to prioritize. All right, so in our daily cycle, there needs to be a point where we are doing some prioritization. So maybe that's something you do right in here, right after you clock in. Your first little bit of work that you do, you're going to deciding, setting up your to-do list. That's kind of the key. Like you just need to have a general idea of what are your main priorities for the day. It doesn't need to be like crazy in depth or whatever. We'll get to that in the later work cycles, but in general, you need to know what's most important. Right? Simple checklist of a few things will be enough typically. So once we have that, we got to move to the next piece, which is prioritization. All right. And this has to be built into our day. And some people, they want to be doing their prioritization in the morning. All right. And they'll do it right up here. Okay. They'll do it right after they clock in. They'll be planning their day, setting up their checklist of top priorities. But some people, they like to do it, at the end of their day, right before they clock out. And honestly, it doesn't really matter whichever one you want to do. Like, the advantage of doing it in the morning is that you're usually a little bit fresher and sometimes decision making is easier. The advantage of doing it before you clock out is that you can kind of just hit the ground running the next day. Typically that one feels a little better in my opinion, but it can take a little bit of extra, muscle at the end of the day to get yourself to make those decisions. But if you get into a rhythm of doing it, it's fine. But generally speaking, either at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, you need to set your priorities. You need to figure out what are the 3 to 5 things that are most important for me to get done that day. All right. Don't overthink this. Just lay it out. If you want a more robust approach to this, well, that's what we do in our Frontline Man program, where we, have our goals set up across our life, our quarter, our week, our day, and then it makes it really clear exactly what you should be working on day to day. But generally speaking, if you can create a checklist, well, then you're going to have enough to be able to start practicing this focus training. So the next part that we have to set up here is our intentional downtime. All right. And so this, could come really, it's probably all this stuff in here after you check out. And you want to make sure you really do this. All right. You need to recover, because when we're focusing and we're getting work done, what we're doing is we're sacrificing present pleasure for future pleasure, future gain, right? And we can do that. We're designed to do that, but we're not designed to do that all the time, because if we are always trying to be productive, then our emotional mind will start to rebel, because there's a part of us that wants to enjoy life now. All right. And if you push that part to a side, typically that's what ends up kind of hijacking your awareness, this, pleasure seeking part of you. If you completely starve it, it's going to start leading you to porn, to scrolling, to eating junk food, to doing dumb stuff that doesn't really align with who you are, because it's just so hungry to enjoy life now. So we got to do that on purpose. We're not really going to be, spending much time on this, but you need to have recovery time. And for some guys, you need to have more recovery time than you're willing to admit. But if you follow this focus protocol, you're actually going to feel good going and letting yourself unwind, because you had a productive day. All right. So often guys, they struggle to actually relax in the evenings. They keep taking work with them. They keep feeling stressed. I got to be doing this. I got to be doing that, because they didn't actually get that much done in their day. Make sure you have your downtime. That's what has to be in there. You can have maybe a short period in your life where you go super hard, but like if you got a deadline or something. But generally speaking, if we're talking about sustainable focus, the downtime is essential. Now, the final piece here of our daily cycle is we need to have clean in and out periods. And what do I mean by that is that, like, basically in this time period where, we're on the clock, we want to keep this area clean, meaning no BS, meaning like when you're on the clock, even if you're taking a bit of a break, like how we're going to be talking about in our work sets, it's not time for you to just go pure recreation mode. It's not time for you to start like watching Netflix or like, having a whole bunch of fun. Okay. Because that typically really throws things off in your day. Save that for the intentional downtime that comes later. And when you really make that space later, it allows you to be much more focused with how you let your brain rest throughout the actual workday. So keep this part in here clean. No like high stimulation escape crap. So that's how we set up our general workday. Clock in, clock out. We do some planning in there. We keep that, clocked in, clocked out space pretty clean, and then we have downtime later. Right? That's the macro sort of structure in the day. But how are we then going to actually do our focus workout? Well, this is where we come into the work sets, okay? And so for this, we need to first get a kind of goal, all right? Like how much focus time do we actually want for the day? This is going to be very dependent upon what your level of focus currently is at, okay? Maybe it's something to set for like 3 hours or 2 hours or maybe 1 hour if you're really struggling. If you've got a lot of other responsibilities and you're just trying to like get a little bit more focus time, maybe it's just, 45 extra minutes. Like you're going to have to decide what it is, but pick that time. And typically you're going to have to be a little bit more conservative than you think, and that is okay, because guys are like, yeah, I work 9 hours a day. I don't know many people who really do intense work for 9 hours a day. If you're doing some softer stuff, easier stuff, yeah, maybe you could do it for that long. But if you're doing truly focused work, which is what we're trying to train here, then you can get a lot done in a short period of time. So just make sure you pick something that's realistic for you. Next piece here is we want to set clear objectives for every work set that we do. Kind of like how if you're going to the gym, you got to know what you're doing in your exercise sets, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to be doing bench press for a few sets, and then I'm going to be doing leg press for a few sets. Then I'm going to be doing, deadlifts or squats or kettlebell lifts, whatever. It's like you got to know what you're doing. So when you sit down and you're about to start a work set, just know what your intention is. And if you set your priorities earlier that day, it's going to be either one of those priorities or a piece of one of those priorities. Just get clear on what this is. The more focused that you are, the easier it is to go, because when you separate out the planning and the execution and the planning set, well, then the execution flows much more naturally. Next piece is we want to use a timer, okay? Because when you're training yourself, we got to have measurement. And using a timer is probably the simplest way to do this. This is how I leveled up my productivity from being able to focus maybe for 20 to 30 minutes a day when I was a porn and video game addict to being able to pretty much focus as much as I want. All right. And it's because I progressively timed myself. I learned how to stay in the act while the clock was ticking, and then learn how to put it down when the clock was not. And you don't need to keep this up necessarily as a permanent lifestyle, but if you want to train this, you want to improve your focus, using a timer, I believe, is almost mandatory. And so the final note here on the work sets is that we want to make sure that we really nail our on-clock recovery. And so what does this mean? Well, in order to explain that, we got to go into our work set design stuff. Okay, so a work set is pretty much just a period of work plus rest. Similar to how maybe you run intervals on a track. It's like I'm going to run for 5 minutes at this pace, and then I'm going to rest for 3 minutes, and then I'm going to do another, however you want to set up the workout, right? But the rest in that context is actually part of the workout. All right, so in-set recovery time means you're not technically pushing the needle getting stuff done, but you're not just goofing off either. And so you might be wondering, all right, well, if I'm in a work set and I'm in the rest period, what am I supposed to do during this rest period? Well, really kind of anything that's not super stimulating. I mean, you can just doodle on a piece of paper, you can stare out the window, you can go for a little walk, you can go grab yourself a drink, okay? You can you just close your mind and close your eyes and breathe for a little bit, all right? But what you don't want to be doing is trying to fill your brain up with something that's distracting, okay? You don't want to be putting on a podcast or scrolling a YouTube video or anything like that, because that takes you really out of the flow, and then it just, makes it so that it's much harder for you to get back to work when it's time to. If you're doing a longer break, you can maybe do a little something like that. If you're taking a 60-minute lunch break or whatever, you want to pop on a podcast while you eat some food, that's okay. But the little shorter breaks, like the 10 minutes and the 5 minutes, keep those very bland. We're trying to keep our dopaminergic capacity high so that our brain is hungry to get back to the work. So one of the most popular methods for this is the Pomodoro method, which you've probably heard of before. And this is pretty simple. So it starts with 25 minutes of work, then you get 5 minutes of rest. Then you do another 25 minutes of work, another 5 minutes of rest, another 25 minutes of work, and then you do a longer break, maybe 30 to 60 minutes or 20 to 60 minutes, okay? And this equals one Pomodoro set. So you end up with approximately, an hour and a half of focused work. And obviously it's, a little bit longer than that because you got the rest periods, but this is what you're looking for, is you're trying to figure out what does a set of focus looks like for me. So you can plop these blocks of focus into your life. And this one's great if you struggle typically to focus. I'll still use the 25 and 5 like this when I'm doing something that's a little bit more difficult. If I'm doing some really complicated content or business decision making, sometimes I'll use this just because I want to make sure that I'm pausing every little bit to check to make sure, am I really on task here or am I tangenting? But it's also great if you just struggle in general. Like maybe you need to even lower it a little bit to 20 minutes on or even 15 minutes on. for a lot of guys, like, 25 minutes is usually a good place to start. And then you can always adjust because there are alternatives for how you can set up a set. All right. Another popular one would be 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off. So that's like a nice round hour sort of structure. Another one would be going 90 minutes on and then 20 to 60 minutes off. And this one's really good once you start getting your focus up, because then you can get into some nice deep work chunks. Maybe even bring it up to 120 minutes if you're doing really well. And you don't need to even just do one of these. You can mix and match these throughout your day, because ultimately what you want to get to is being able to set up a general schedule for yourself where you've got your clock in, your clock out, and then you can just bang out sets of however you want to design them. And sometimes it's going to be a little different. Maybe my afternoon actually is all meetings. Okay, it's all blocked out meetings, but then in the morning I'm going to be focusing on getting, these work sets in for creating content or whatever it is that I need to do. And then obviously we got our intentional downtime here. And so basically, if you do this, if you start setting up your days like a workout for your focus, you're going to improve. So what I want to cover now is some tips to help you with this process. First tip, I want to focus on quality over quantity. All right, because when you're tapping into real focus, you get a lot more done in less time. So you're better off doing a smaller amount of intensely focused work than just a lot of like half-assed work, because you get good at what you practice. And if you practice like, half focused crap where you're kind of scrolling on the side and, you're bouncing around between different things, well, then that's what you're going to build as your default. And we don't want that. We want you to be like a laser beam where you can just choom, 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 really dive deep, hit hard, and get things done, because no one wants to spend more time working than they need to. So focus, if you need to, on quality, shrinking it down and making sure that when you're on the clock and you're getting stuff done, you're really getting stuff done. Next piece is be humble and realistic. This was hard for me at first because I was like, yeah, I'm going to work an 8-hour workday. And it's like, dude, I was nowhere close to being able to do that. And even now, 8 hours of intensely focused work is very difficult. Like if I do 8 hours of hard focus, I'm going to be wiped the next day. Very, very likely. I'm going to be wiped and it's going to be difficult. Even if I sit down and focus the following day, my brain's just not going to be typically on board. So be realistic with yourself. All right. Start with something that you feel like you could do. Okay. And then you can level it up. Next piece. Not all work is equal. I kind of mentioned this before, but it's very important to note. Like some work is going to be a lot harder. All right. Like if you're doing something that's, like pulling teeth for you, like you got to get some taxes stuff done and you hate doing taxes. Well, that's where you might want to go with that 25 and 5 Pomodoro method where it's like, whew, this stuff is draining. I need these breaks in here. All right. But for other situations, like, I could do this stuff for 2 hours straight. All right, great. Do it like that. Just be understanding that not all tasks are created equal and you want to match your workout to the effort involved. In the same way that like, all right, you're not going to be able to deadlift 500 pounds for the same amount of time that you're going to be able to run at a jogging pace. Okay. Right. It's just not going to work. So understand the cognitive load that is placed upon you by the things that you're trying to get yourself to do. Give yourself enough time for planning. And sometimes, you got to allow that to be part of your focused work. That was one of the first things I had to learn when I was working for myself was that, hey, a huge amount of my stuff, especially as a self-employed man, is decision making. And, if you're coming from a place where you typically work for someone else or, you were a student or whatever, like you're used to people telling you what to do. But if you want to start taking control of your life, you want to start building up your own projects, working towards your own goals, that's all self-directed stuff. And in order for you to do that, you got to be the planner. You've got to be the manager of yourself. So recognizing that maybe like, that first 25-minute Pomodoro chunk of your day, that's you planning your day. That's where you do your decision making. And so giving space for that cognitive decision making work and treating that as part of the focused work is really important. All right. So make sure you take that seriously. Obviously, we don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole of like being this person who's only planning and never executing. So keep the plans rugged, keep them simple, keep them good enough, but make sure you do it so that what you're supposed to be executing on. Progressively increase your abilities. All right. So, you're going to start out being able to do a certain amount, and then you're going to go up to more, and then you'll be able to do more, and then you'll be able to do more. And just take it slow. All right. Just be realistic with yourself. Don't force this process. You'll find yourself actually craving this kind of deep work. In the same way that you'll find that if you work out regularly and then you don't work out for a period, well, your body's actually going to ache. It's going to crave that workout. But it takes a while to build up to that. Be realistic with it. Go progressively. And at a certain point, you just got to cap it and be like, this is enough. All right. This is the amount that I want to work, generally speaking, day in and day out. And everyone's going to have their own sweet spot. Maybe it's going to be 2 hours, maybe it's going to be 3 hours, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 6. It's going to be different for everyone. But don't just keep infinitely increasing it, okay? Because you need that recovery piece that we were talking about before. And now the final tip, which is a very important one, is that you need to nail your inner game. Because at the end of the day, as powerful as this plan is, it won't do a damn thing if you can't get yourself to follow it. And the main reason that guys can't execute on a focused training plan like this is because his autopilot mind is conditioned to seek immediate comfort rather than progress. Okay. And so for a lot of guys, this shows up as a compulsive porn habit or a scrolling habit or a gaming habit. Basically just they're working 1 minute, they're supposed to be on the clock, but then their mind just, jumps ship, and then they, start doing some dumb stuff. Okay. And so we got to fix that. And that's where this inner game comes in. We need to reprogram our minds. So if you would like to learn an insanely powerful and simple 5-minute journaling technique that I've taught to thousands of guys to defeat these kinds of autopilot cravings and increase their discipline automatically, then I want you to click the link in the description and watch this free training now. That's what I have for you guys today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. You got something out of it. I want to hear about your experiences with it. Let me know. Try this out. Tell me how it worked. Let me know if you got any questions. Happy to talk more about any of this stuff. Thanks for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Ooh, yeah.